This movie tried to take us back to the Men in Black that we know and love, but instead just ended up driving us down the wrong side of the road. Hello and welcome to another episode of Not So Super Movie Reviews. Today we're talking about Men in Black International, and this movie had a Rotten Tomatoes critic score of 22%. And a user review score of 66%, which is a pretty sizable gap, and I have a pretty good idea why I think that might be. And so let's get into that. So let's say something nice. The first thing I got to talk about here is casting. In my opinion, I think they nailed it with the casting. I think the idea of taking the power duo from Thor Ragnarok of Chris Hemsworth and Tessa Thompson and putting that in another movie was a great idea. And when I actually saw that they were cast for Men in Black International before it came out, I was all for it. I thought that was actually a really good choice. Because, Men in Black is typically a buddy, kind of buddy cop, but in space sort of movie. And I think that they're a great duo. I think they have a great chemistry together. Unfortunately, this movie didn't really do much with that as far as the writing goes, but I did like the casting. Having Liam Neeson as the head of the London MIB was a great choice. Liam Neeson's, of course, amazing. And you have to talk about Pawnee, Kumail Nanjiani, who's just like the most amazing little comedic relief sidekick. You really just don't get enough of him in this film. They could have definitely sprinkled a little bit of more Pawnee in there for me. But overall, I can't think of any characters that I just didn't like as far as the casting. They did what they could with what they had. The second thing is more of an honorable mention, and this is really only because I talked about how bad the graphics were in the last Men in Black movie I talked about, which was Men in Black 2. But the special effects in this movie, we'll talk about what I didn't like about them, but you have to admit they were amazing. There were just so many beautiful effects and colorful effects. The two generic bad guys who kind of turn into these little nebulous sort of amorphous space-looking guys, just really beautiful. They definitely spared no expense with the special effects budget, and I for one did appreciate that. There's just a lot of really unique uses of the special effects in this movie, so that's worth mentioning. Alright, now so let's talk about what didn't work, and a little bit unusual to my channel, but I really only have one thing to say, but this one thing encompasses a lot of what was wrong with this movie, and that is that it wasn't a Men in Black movie. There may have been some weird aliens and neuralizers and people in black suits, but that's not what makes it a Men in Black movie. There's some really key points, and I want to talk about where they missed the mark on those key points. The first thing is the aesthetic. The Men in Black has, and really the first three movies all did this really well. They have this sort of retro futurist sort of vibe to them where everything's high-tech and futuristic, but it doesn't feel like the typical futuristic sci-fi stuff that we're getting these days. It sort of feels like its own thing, its own unique thing. All the different aliens in the universe, it just has this really sort of gritty, earthy feel to it that's kind of hard to describe. Kind of like what Star Wars did with the concept of having an old universe where everything is high tech, but it's an older universe than what we are used to, and so everything looks sort of run down and out of place. And just like the first three, episodes 1 through 3 Star Wars movies kind of did away with that aesthetic, this movie does away with it too in favor of the high budget special effects garbage that we get in every movie. They looked good, but it was just your typical, there's little hologram screens everywhere, and there's, everything's sleek and fast, and it's glowing for some reason. And everything's just very, very polished and very cookie cutter. As my friend Mike said, it is very cookie cutter stuff in this movie. And that's a Men in Black movie has this specific style that you can't always put your finger on, but you know it when you see it. And you know it when you don't see it too. In this movie, I didn't see it. The second thing that a Men in Black movie is to me is, like I mentioned earlier, it's a buddy cop movie but with sci-fi elements. And that means the focus on your main characters and their relationship. And our main characters, it does focus on them, but that's sort of a side thing. And it really isn't in the first three Men in Black movies. Their relationship and how they interact with each other and how they're interacting with the story is very much tied to them and who they are. In this movie, it's kind of superficial in how they meet and how they interact with each other. And like I said, they just didn't capture the same thunder as they did in Thor Ragnarok with these two. And when you're trying to fill the shoes of, you know, Will Smith, Tommy Lee Jones, and in the third movie you had Thanos, who's just killing it in everything these days. He was just amazing too, and those are some big shoes to fill as far as characters, and they drive those Men in Black movies. Tessa Thompson and Chris Hemsworth just didn't drive this movie, in my opinion. The final thing that a Men in Black movie is, to me, is a unique story. Now, I mentioned in my last video for Men in Black 2 that every Men in Black movie follows a specific formula. You can watch that video to talk about exactly what that formula is, but the overarching story always kind of follows that formula for all four movies for the most part. This movie's no exception, except for it didn't really do anything sort of unique. There's the bad guy is so generic. They do this 180 twist where they say, oh, the bad guy wasn't who you thought it was. You see that coming a mile ahead, and you have the big bads who you thought were the big bads. They just get killed and they're gone. There wasn't much there to begin with, but it just sort of wipes them away, and instead of feeling like it was this huge twist, it just feels like you spent a lot of the movie on these characters that don't matter. And at the end of the day, the story is, in this movie, it feels like a way to get to another action scene. So it's like, how much story do we need to put in here so that we can get to the next set piece and the next chase scene, the next fight scene? And that's really all this movie was. And that's not what a Men in Black movie is. It's a unique story with strong characters and a specific vibe. And this movie just made zero attempt to capture any of those elements, and it's painfully obvious. And I think that for me, I watched all four Men in Black movies in a row. I didn't watch the first one, but I've seen it a million times. But I watched 2, 3, and then International. And the lack of the Men in Black feeling was so obvious to me after I had finished watching. Alright, so who was right, the critics or the users? Now, like I said in the beginning, I think I have an idea of why there's such a big gap here. And I think it gets down to the fact of what I've kind of been driving home, which is that for a Men in Black movie, for all the unique elements that makes a Men in Black movie, they completely miss the mark. And I think that's where the critics are coming from. So if I'm talking about it as the fourth movie in a franchise of the Men in Black movies, I agree with the critics because, like I said, they made no effort there. But if we're talking about it as just another summer sci-fi blockbuster, like I said, take out those iconic Men in Black elements, and I kind of agree with the users, and I think that's maybe was the problem here, which is that they were trying to sell us this movie, and they tried to give us what they thought we wanted instead of trying to give us a really good, unique movie. And so, at the end of the day, I kind of agree with both, but on different points. So, yeah, we'll say that for now I agree with the users because it is an entertaining movie. The action scenes are good, the jokes land, but it's just very straightforward, cookie cutter, safe kind of stuff. Alright, it's time for the bad lightning round. This movie didn't have a lot of really cringy, terrible lines, but there were a couple, so let's do it. You look after Poppy so well. Poppy's little fancy boy. Longest not feel so good. If having a big old heart is a crime, shoot me. Alright everybody, thank you for checking out another video. If you want to check out my last week's video on Men in Black 2, go ahead and check out the link here. I'm also going to another link to some of the other videos here. If you like the video, hit the like button. You can subscribe by following this link here. If you agree with me, you disagree with me, I'd love to hear from you in the comments and talk about it. Once again, thanks for checking it out, and we'll see you next week.